All right, today we're cracking open a historical cold case. We're dusting off evidence that's been hiding in plain sight for, well, millennia. This is an investigation into a story that could seriously rewrite everything we think we know about where we come from. So, let's get into it.
Our entire investigation really boils down to this one single question. What if all those ancient stories, the ones about gods descending from the sky, what if they weren't just folklore? What if they were eyewitness accounts? Factual records of beings with technology so far beyond ours, it might as well have been magic. That's the idea we're putting under the microscope today.
Our first piece of evidence takes us way back to ancient Mesopotamia, right to the dawn of what we call civilization. And it's here we find our first major red flag, the first big anomaly in our case file, the Sumerians. Okay, so civilizations are supposed to grow slowly, right? Over thousands of years. But the Sumerians, they kind of just show up, fully formed. Out of nowhere, they're on the world stage with these incredibly sophisticated legal codes, complex math, and a shockingly accurate understanding of the stars. The official story just doesn't explain that sudden leap. So you have to ask, where did all that knowledge come from?
Now, this is where it gets really wild. Buried in their own records is our next major clue, a timeline that just completely shatters conventional history. Let's take a look at the numbers. According to something called the Sumerian Kings List, it's an ancient stone tablet that basically lists all their rulers, beings they called the Anunnaki, who they said came from the sky, ruled over Earth for 241,200 years. And get this, all of this supposedly happened before the Great Flood. And here's the thing, this number is so massive, so absolutely impossible sounding, that most historians just write it off. They say, oh, that's just a myth, it's symbolic. But look, in any investigation, you can't just throw out a key piece of testimony because you don't like it. We have to ask the question, what if they were being literal? And that's the critical point, isn't it? A reign that long is completely impossible for a species with our lifespan. It just breaks everything we know about biology and history. But see, the Sumerians never said the Anunnaki were human. They called them sky beings. And a timeline like that suggests they have mastery over life and technology that we can barely even begin to imagine.
So this brings us to what I would call Exhibit B. Thousands of these small, intricately carved cylinder seals. Think of them like the fingerprints left behind at the scene of our own forgotten history. And when you look at them really, really closely, they reveal something incredible.
So here we see the two competing theories. The official story says these seals are just, religious art, pretty pictures. But our investigation is looking at a completely different possibility. What if they're not just art? What if they're actually diagrams, technical blueprints for some seriously advanced tech?
Okay, case in point. On one of these seals, carved thousands of years ago, we see a stunningly accurate map of our solar system, with the sun right in the middle. It shows all the planets we know about, all the way out to Neptune. But then, there's Pluto. We, with all our modern telescopes, didn't officially discover Pluto until 1930. So how in the world could the Sumerians have known it was there? Unless, of course, they weren't guessing. They were working from a map that was given to them.
And the blueprints? Oh, they get even more specific. Other seals show these figures stepping through what can only be described as, well, shimmering portals, surrounded by what look like complex machines. When you analyze this, the evidence points to a crazy conclusion. The Sumerians weren't just mapping the stars, they were documenting the technology to travel to them.
Now, any kind of advanced technology needs infrastructure, right? So that takes us from these tiny, detailed artifacts to absolutely massive structures that you can see from miles away. The Sumerians built these enormous, stepped pyramids called Ziggurats, and what they called them is really revealing. They literally described them as links, a connection point between our world, Earth, and the heavens. I don't know about you, but that sounds a lot less like a place of worship and more like a piece of functional hardware.
Just look at the visual evidence for a second. On the left, you have a ziggurat. On the right, a modern NASA launch pad. I mean, the functional resemblance it's uncanny. Both are these huge, multi-level platforms designed to help something get to the sky. So is it just a temple, or was it a spaceport?
If you start thinking of them as technology, their purpose suddenly clicks into place. Maybe they were landing beacons for spacecraft, or huge power generators for some kind of planetary grid. Maybe they were nodes in a communication system,
or even physical anchors to stabilize those very same stargates we see on the seals. They weren't just buildings, they were pieces of a much bigger system. So this leads us to the final question in any big investigation. If this hyper-advanced civilization was really here, where did it go? Well, the records actually have an answer for that too, and it involves a planetary scale reset button.
The timeline seems to suggest that their incredibly long reign was cut short by a global catastrophe, the Great Flood, which is a story remembered in myths all across the world. For the Anunnaki, this event wasn't the end, but it was a major turning point. It was the moment they decided to pack up and leave.
But the stories say they didn't just disappear. There are a few theories. Some say they just went home, using that Stargate tech to go back to the stars. Others think they retreated deep inside the Earth into some kind of hidden empire. But pretty much all the accounts agree on one thing. They didn't leave us empty-handed. They left behind a legacy of forbidden knowledge and a huge piece of our own history that we're only now starting to piece back together.
So when you put all the evidence on the table, the impossible timeline, the technical blueprints on the seals, the functional design of the Ziggurats, a completely new picture of our past starts to emerge. Those seals stop being just art. They become a testimony to a time when humanity was not alone, when we were part of a story that was so much bigger, so much more cosmic than we've ever been told.
And that brings us to one last lingering thought. The Sumerian records seem to hint at a cycle. The knowledge was lost, but now it's being found again. The evidence suggests the gate they used to leave is very real. So, if that gate is opening again, the only question that really matters is, are we ready for what or who comes through?